Hello everybody, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. This time we're going to be looking at the BP05 Lust Abyss deck. So Abyss got two Omens in this set due to the digital game having both Bloodcraft and Shadowcraft. Last time we looked at Rulanai, who was the Shadowcraft Omen of Silence. This time we're going to be looking at one of the other Omens, the Bloodcraft Omen Valnareik. The Omens are, of course, as usual, the cover characters of BP05 Omens Eternal. Valnareik is the Omen of Lust. Her mechanics are, as described here, drinking your opponent's life force dry, though she actually does it to you too. So this is a Sanguine-focused deck. The Lust cards pretty much all work around the Sanguine mechanic. Only Valnareik has the Sanguine keyword, but the rest of them all deal damage to you for their effects. So they work quite well with all the existing Sanguine support, things like Ambling Wraith, Skeleton Fighter, Dark General. A lot of the cards that saw play in like the set 2 aggro deck. Trait-wise, all these cards are Demon Trait. Only one of them cares about Demon Trait, but it does mean there's some pretty good synergy involving that card. The Apostle of Lust will heal you whenever a demon enters the field, which can help you sort of make up for all the life loss that you're experiencing to trigger your Sanguine effects. Looking at the deck itself, as always, this is meant to be a starting point. This is a pretty just like streamlined playsets of everything deck, so test it for yourself, make any card changes or quantity changes that you find necessary for your meta, and enjoy. So, as I said, lots of 3-ofs, very low curve, and you'll actually see a lot of probably cards that you're used to seeing from like the set 2 decks, the early on aggro decks. You can check out the deck log page, as always, using the code in the bottom right, or the URL in the description. It's going to be 48QA4 for this deck. Our Evolve deck is actually quite small. We only have 3 different cards in the main deck that evolve, so 8 Evolve deck cards. If you're actually playing this in a tournament, I would recommend just adding any 2 others to fill it out. That way your opponent doesn't actually know that you're only playing 8 cards that can evolve. But yeah. Not a lot going on in the Evolve department. Makes it really easy to just pick going first every time, because you won't really need the Evo points as much. Looking at our curve, it's crazy low. 27 cards that cost 2 or lower. And the rest of our deck is pretty much 3s and 4s, with just Majera Bane at 5. So really low curve, lots of followers. 8 spells might seem unusual in an aggro deck, but it's Razory Claw is 3 of them. And Wings of Lust we'll look at as an insane enabler for our Sanguine effects. And Embracing Wings just has some good synergy with other cards in the deck. So, makes sense to have the 8 spells here. And everything else is kind of just go fast aggro followers. So, taking a look at them. First up, we have Ambling Wraith. Sort of the set 1 staple for these aggro decks. 1 cost 2/1 Fanfare, deal 1 to each leader. Not only is this a decently aggressive stat line, having 2 attack, the 1 damage to each leader is pretty much unstoppable, so you're always going to be able to get 1 damage into your opponent, and if they don't kill it immediately, 2 more. Making this kind of like effectively a 3/1, which is a great stat line for a 1-drop, and it only costs 1 and deals damage to you, so it's a very cheap enabler for all of our cards that need us to have taken damage during the turn for their effects. Next up, we have a new card from BP05, Disciple of Lust. This card's actually very similar to Ambling Wraith. It's a 1 cost 1/1 with Fanfare, deal 1 to each leader, and Strike, deal 1 to each leader. So it's still dealing the same amount of damage by the time it attacks. However, it will have dealt damage to you a second time, which might seem worse on paper, but it means that it's actually a way for us to enable all of these Sanguine effects on turn 2 if we play Disciple of Lust on turn 1. One of the downsides of Ambling Wraith is that if you play it as your 1-drop, you don't get Sanguine on turn 2 as easily. You have to find another way to activate it. Disciple of Lust, you can play it on 1, deal 1 to your opponent, and then on turn 2, attack, deal 1 to each player, hit your opponent for 1, and then play say Valnareik, and since you've taken damage this turn, she'll have Storm, or a Skeleton Fighter or anything like that. So this card is very good for being able to get our effects turned on for cheap. It also means that since it's a strike effect, any turn that she's just already on board when we start the turn, she'll be able to trigger all of those effects for free. Our other 1-drop follower is Skeleton Fighter, 1 cost 2/2. Fanfare, if Sanguine is active, give this follower +1/+1. So that's going to make it a 3/3, which is kind of an insane stat line for a 1-drop. It's just very difficult to answer in the early game. It's always going to take more than 1 play point to clear out, unless you're like Disdain Dragon with Disdainful Rending. But everything else, you're going to take like at least 2 play points to answer it with like a Surefire Bullet or something. So always trades like play point positive. And it can start getting in for some really dangerous damage, especially in games where you go, say, like turn 1, play whatever 1-drop, and then turn 2, either Ambling Wraith Skeleton Fighter or Disciple of Lust Skeleton Fighter. The rare games where you get to go turn 1 Disciple of Lust into turn 2 attack your opponent, and then Skeleton Fighter, you have 2 3/3s on board. You just get so far ahead in the aggro race that it's very difficult to keep up. So great card for just pressuring the opponent in the early game. And if you have to play it on turn 1, it's still a 2/2, so that's not bad either. And there are, as you can see, these are all of our ways to activate Sanguine by dealing damage to ourselves. It's 8 cards. There's only 14 unique cards in the deck, so it's over half of our deck can turn on Sanguine for us. So it's very easy to just always jam this guy as a 3/3, as long as you're not playing him on turn 1. Next up, our last 1 cost is a spell, Wings of Lust. Choose up to 2 of the following. Option 1, select a follower on your field, give it Rush, deal 1 to your leader. Option 2, select an enemy follower on the field, deal 2 to it and 1 to your leader. Or option 3, deal 1 to your leader, draw a card, discard a card. So this is a super flexible card, especially since you get to choose 2 of the options. You can either give Rush, deal 2, or draw Ditch, and each choice deals 1 to your own leader. Generally, you're not going to be picking the Rush unless you absolutely need to trade into something with like an Apostle of Lust or something. You'll usually be like dealing 2 to an enemy follower and then draw 1, discard 1. It makes it pretty nice as just like an Angelic Snipe to keep other aggro decks off of you. But really the big thing is it just deals damage to yourself and gives you some amount of utility in the process. The draw 1, discard 1 is also quite good if you accidentally open too many like 4 and 5 drops early and just want more gas. Or if you're getting to like turn 4 or 5 and have a bunch of 1-drops and you're trying to find those better cards to play, you can just pitch whatever extra card you have and try to dig for like Dark General or Majera Bane or something. But dealing 1 to yourself twice is the biggest draw to this card. Next up, we have Demonic Hedonist. This is a 2-cost 2/2 at the start of your end phase. If Sanguine is active, draw a card, then discard a card. Again, we have a ton of ways to activate this. It gives us great hand filtering, just to be able to, again, find the pieces that we need at the right points in the game. It also evolves for 1 into a 3/3. Same effect, but also has a strike, deal 1 damage to each leader. This effectively makes it a 4/3 when it attacks in, which is just a really good stat line for a 2-drop Evo. And it also deals a damage to your own leader, so it's turning on all of your effects once again. Since it's strike, it's free. If you're able to let it live on board for a turn and then just swing with it, you have all of your play points to benefit from having dealt damage to yourself instead of trying to use them to deal damage to yourself. So very important card for the deck. I don't see this in as many lists as I feel like I should. I think this card's real great. And again, we have plenty of payoffs for Sanguine. I'm going to stop showing those like every other slide because all the cards in this deck are either enablers or payoffs. Next, we have 3 copies of Demonium. As 2-drop, 2/3 ward. Give your leader -2 defense to gain Bane once per turn. And last words, give your leader +2 defense. So this might not seem like an aggro card. It has a 2/3 stat line, so it's more defensive. It's a ward. But the big thing here is that we can, for 0 play points, give our leader -2 defense to give it Bane, which is going to turn on all of our effects once again. If we're able to play this guy on 2, then that's a 0 play point way to activate our effects on turn 3. Kind of the big thing we're going for here is just find the cheapest enablers possible, and anything that can do it for 0 is really helpful. It also, last words, gives us 2 defense back, so we're not hurting ourselves as much. It allows us to stay at least somewhat healthy. Next, we have 3 copies of Fina, Dynamite Daredevil. 2-drop 3/2, so back to the aggressive stat lines. Fanfare, choose one of the following. Option 1, look at the top 5 cards of your deck. You may reveal a follower that costs 1 play point from among them, add it to your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in any order. This can be able to get us Ambling Wraith, Disciple of Lust, or Skeleton Fighter. So our 9 1-drops. This is very good. It's just a turn 2 play to keep finding gas if your opponent didn't have a turn 1 play. Sort of keeps you ahead, keeps your hand full of cards that you can play. Option 2 is that you can select an enemy follower that costs 1 play point on the field and destroy it. That part's going to be really important in aggro mirrors. If you go first, it pretty much gives you the ability to completely shut your opponent out of the game early. You play a 1-drop, they play a 1-drop, and then you play Fina, blow up their 1-drop, and then attack with yours, right? So now you have, say, like a 2-1 and a 3-2 on board. Your opponent has nothing. They've taken 2 damage. You're threatening at least 5 more next turn, potentially up to like 9 more. So really powerful card there. If you go second, it also helps you stay in the game just by clearing one of their guys and presenting a 3-2 very early in the game that they're not going to be able to answer as easily. Now for the star of the show, Valnareik, Omen of Lust. This is a 2-cost 2/2. While Sanguine is active, this follower has Storm. Strike, deal X damage to each enemy leader. X equals the number of times your leader has lost defense this turn. If your leader's defense is 7, give this +2/+2. The +2/+2 from having 7 is just completely random. It's probably not going to come up very often. It's just kind of going to be if you get lucky and like time all your drain effects properly, you might be able to get it there. We're really just playing it for the deal X damage and the Storm though. Any turn where you're able to like play a Wings of Lust and then play this and attack for 2 and then also deal 2 to your opponent because you lost 1 defense twice is fantastic. And that is kind of why Wings of Lust is one of the best cards in the deck. Dealing 1 twice is so much better than dealing 2 just because it triggers Valnareik's effect. It makes X 2 instead of just 1. She doesn't care how much defense you lost, just how many times. Also, unfortunately, makes cards like Demonium a little worse, since you're paying 2 but only getting 1 back out of it. Oh well, can't win all of them. But being able to just jam Valnareik and burn 2 or burn 3 over and over again, while also hitting our opponent for 2, is really how we're going to win a lot of games and just keep the pressure up consistently. Our last 2-cost is Razory Claw. Spell that has always seen play in the sort of aggro Abyss decks. 2-cost, quick timing, deal 2 to your own leader, and then deal 3 to an enemy leader or enemy follower on the field. This is more damage to your opponent than it is to you, which is about all you need in this deck. It's a great way just to get those kill turns where, you know, you have 5 or 6 play points. You can play a Razory Claw, play something else, play a Valnareik, burn your opponent for like 3. So you get, you know, 7, 8, 9 damage total in a turn just off of that, plus whatever you already had on board. Really good for just clearing things out. You can also use it as removal if you have to. If you're playing, you know, aggro mirror and your opponent puts a 3/3 down, maybe you have to lose the 2 life to be able to clear their guy. And then, you know, that Sanguine still enables your Valnareik to get some damage in. Something like that. Playful Necromancer. This card, another starter deck card, always sort of seen play in the aggro decks. Still really good here. It's one of the few cards that's not tied to Sanguine in this deck. It's more just generic aggro. 3-cost 3/3 that evos for 1 into a 4/4. On evolve, you summon 3 ghost tokens. So these are 1/1s with Storm that banish at the start of your end phase. It just gives you a, you know, 3 immediate damage with the ghosts, and then it's still a 4/4 that's threatening your opponent on the next turn. Can also be really good against decks that put wards on the field early. especially with Forest now having Fairy Dragon in set 6. This card will still be a good way to answer that. You can just attack their ward with 4 attack. Generally, that's also not going to trade. You're going to be able to keep your Playful Necromancer around as like a 4-2 or 4-1. And then the 3 ghosts still get to go face. Your opponent kind of lost their board and still has to figure out how to answer yours on the next turn. Our 3-cost spell, Embracing Wings. This card might seem a little slow for an aggro deck, and sometimes it can be, but I think it's still a good card to have a couple copies of, like 1 or 2, regardless. Select an enemy follower on the field, destroy it, deal 2 damage to your leader, and then select up to 1 Valnareik in your cemetery and add it to your hand. So this is just straight up removal. It's really good for clearing big wards that might be eating like a lot of your attacks and preventing you from getting good damage through. It deals 2 to yourself as a like downside for only costing 3, but that's kind of an upside in this deck since it is going to be turning all of our effects on. And it gives you a Valnareik back. So if you're playing this on like turn 5, you can destroy their guy, get the Valnareik back, play her. Since you dealt 2 to yourself, she now has Storm and deals 1 to your opponent. So some good synergy there. You know, even early in the game, if you have to use it on like turn 3 to blow something up, you can grab your turn 2 Valnareik back to jam on turn 4 along with some other cards. So getting the Valnareik back is really good just since she's so strong and such an aggressive card that is sort of the cornerstone of our strategy here. Our 4-drop Apostle of Lust. This is another way to just keep recycling our Valnareiks, mainly. You can engage him and give your leader -1 defense to select a follower that costs 2 or less in cemetery and put it onto your field. We have 7 cost 2 or lower followers in our deck. Generally, you're going to want to get Valnareik here, just because giving your leader -1 defense for cost will already turn on her Sanguine effect. So she just immediately has Storm and deals 1 on attack. This means that if you played a Valnareik on like turn 2 or 3 and your opponent killed it, your turn 4, you can just Apostle of Lust, engage, get the 2/2, deal 1, hit your opponent for 2. They now have to answer a 4/4 and a 2/2, and they took 3 damage immediately. The other 2 drops that you might want to get, Fina is okay to dig for more 1 drops or blow something up. Demonium is good if you just need to sort of stall an extra turn, or get the Bane off of Demonium to try to clear something on the next turn. Since you can just get a ward, gain some defense off of it back, anything like that. Skeleton Fighter is, I guess, technically the biggest stat line you can get at 3/3, other than Demonic Hedonist Evolving. Which, Demonic Hedonist Evolving can also be quite good. If you go second, you can play Apostle of Lust, engage, bring out Hedonist, use your Evo point to evolve, swing, deal 1 to your opponent, maybe trade into something, draw ditch at the end of turn. So lots of options here. He can do quite a few good things. However, he also has another effect. Whenever another demon follower is put onto your field, give your leader +1 defense. So we have most of our followers are demons outside of like Ambling Wraith and Skeleton Fighter. So, and a lot of them that you can get off of Apostle of Lust are demons. So Hedonist, Demonium, Valnareik. Apostle himself is a demon if you ever play a second copy, and Dark General on turn 4 or 5, or I guess turn 5 if you play Apostle of Lust on 4. Also a demon that's going to give you defense back. Not a huge part of the deck, but it is a pretty good way just to like counteract some of the damage that you're dealing to yourself. Make it so some of your Sanguine effects don't actually drain your defense, and put you in a more vulnerable position. Our other 4-drop is Dark General. This is a 4-cost 5/5, which is already a reasonably large stat line. You don't see 4-drop 5/5s super often. Fanfare, if Sanguine is active, give this follower Storm. So that's, you know, about as simple as it gets. It's a 5/5 Storm if you've found a way to deal damage to yourself this turn. Works really well with any of the cards that have Strike to deal damage to yourself, or Demonium that can just pay 2 defense. Since you can just, on turn 4, play her and immediately Storm for 5. On later turns, you can use her with like Wings of Lust or something to get it turned on for cheap, or like Disciple of Lust, any of the 1-drops. You can get turn 5 Dark General. And yeah, she's kind of just a big beat stick that your opponent has to deal with. Not a whole lot else going on there. And lastly, we have Majerabane, the Omen of 1. This is a 5-cost 5/5 neutral rush. At the start of your end phase, if there are 2 cards or less in your hand, deal 3 damage to each enemy leader. If there are 0 cards in your hand, deal 3 damage to each enemy follower. He evolves for 1 into a 6/6 with a similar effect. He refreshes himself now at the start of your end phase. And if you have 2 or less, you'll deal 5 to leader, and 0, you'll deal 5 to followers. So, this card is basically our top end. Aggro decks like this can run out of cards in hand quite easily. You know, if you're running out, 2 or 3 cards a turn, since you have so many 1 and 2 drops, you can get down to at least 2 or less cards in hand, if not 0, very quickly. You can play Majerabane, and now he's effectively 5 storm damage, since he's going to deal the 5 at end step. But your opponent doesn't get quick timing to interact with that. And they're going to have to answer a 6/6, or else they're just dead on the next turn. Because if you deal 5 to them, and then have a 6/6 that gets to swing in, and then deal 5 more, you're not losing at that point. So he's really good at just sort of cleaning up the game, getting that last burst of storm damage once you've run out of cards. Looking at the deck as a whole, it's very simple deck. You're kind of just always going face, always pushing your opponent. Some of the pros of that, obviously, you have the very fast aggressive curve. You're going to get under a lot of decks, especially some of the slower, like, mid-rangey ones. You have a lot of sources of burn and storm damage, so even if your opponent has good removal, they're going to have to be able to use it at quick timing, because you're getting your damage immediately. And the burn damage, they're not going to be able to stop at all, outside of Lyriel. And almost every card in the deck is either an enabler or a payoff. There's only a couple cards, Fina, Playful Necromancer, and Majerabane, that aren't either. So very consistent, because you're always drawing cards that do something for you. As long as you have an enabler and a payoff in any combination, just every card in your hand is super good gas. Not a lot of bricks that you could be drawing. Cons, on the other hand, it can run out of cards very quickly, and that's why we play Majerabane, to try to mitigate that, or try to benefit from it. It can struggle to get through large ward boards. This is part of the reason that we play, like, Embracing Wings, or have Demonium for Bane, is to get through big wards that we can't otherwise. It's pretty unfortunate if we have to trade, like, 2 or 3 of our attacks into something just to clear it, and then we don't have any more attacks to send to face. And it deals a lot of damage to itself, which obviously you have to for this kind of mechanic to work, but the downside is that it's easier for your opponent to kill you. They're probably not going to have to get through 20 defense, they might only have to get through like 12, which makes it quite easy for them to kill you, and means that you do have to end the game very fast. But yeah, looking at the deck as a whole, I do think this deck's very powerful, despite how simple it is and straightforward. It maybe seems a little too easy to interact with. A lot of decks just don't have the interaction quick enough to come back from it. They're really trying to stabilize around like turn 5 or 6 to turn the game around, and you can quite often end it by then. Obviously our small Evo deck again. And yeah, that's about it for this one. Pretty short one just because of how straightforward the deck is, but that straightforward does not necessarily mean weak. I do think this deck is quite worth playing. And especially once we get BP06, it gets even more support, and I'll do another deck profile on that. But it gets even stronger, and I think might be one of the better decks in the format. So again, thank you for watching. We'll have the rest of these set 5 decks coming out soon, and then set 6 releasing very soon as well, so we'll be getting into some decks for that. Until then, there should be some on the screen for you to watch, and we'll see you next time.